We will talk a bit about how to set up a repository for Dataverse in Azure DevOps or in, and please ask questions if you have any question about any other part. Like I will show where we store our YAML files for pipelines and how we store plugins and so on. So if you have any question around them, just ask. First of all, I want to thank our sponsors. Without them, we couldn't be here. So thanks to Microsoft and ASO, PwC, Proximo, AAS, and Docs42. And then all the other sponsors we have as well. A bit about myself. Benedikt Bergmann is my name. I'm a Power Platform consultant in Sweden, working for CRM Consultana. I'm coming from Germany, moved to Sweden like 4.5 years ago, something like that. And I'm a .NET developer, have added Angular a bit later, or React as well, and then moved on, or was moved on to Dynamics then later on to Power Platform. So if you want to connect to me, you can just scan the QR code. There are all my links to LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever you prefer, and I have them at the end as well. There's another slide. So the agenda for today. We go through a bit of theory. I will show a brief look at the folder structure and then explain a bit of the different projects we are using and what shared projects are, because we use them for plugins. And then we go into like a demo and I will show you how our usual setup we have in Azure DevOps or in the repository. So the folders we usually have, in the root folder, we have like a development folder and a Power Platform folder and a pipeline definition folder. And in those we have, for development, Sparkle, Azure backend and frontend, containing the stuff therefore. We will look at that in detail. And then in the Power Platform ones, we store usually Canvas apps, like the extracted MS app files or even the unpacked MS app files. And then we have configuration. So that's for configuration data. You're usually moving from one environment to another. It's getting less and less because we have the environment variables, but still you could create like entities which should be moved between environments. So you can store that in those. And then we have a solution folder for storing the unpacked solutions we have for our project. And the pipeline definition, it's like the name says, it's the YAML files for our pipelines. The projects we are using, we have usually plugin projects, so C# projects. Those I tend to have a project per entity, so plugin project per entity, split the assemblies, so that they don't get too big. And then we have usually workflow steps project, but it's getting less and less that we need that. And an application folder for every application which is using our Dataverse. Like a custom portal, for example, if they don't want to use Power Portals or Power Pages, or integration applications or whatever application you can think of. And then we have front-end stuff, which is TypeScript, PCFs, and front-end tests. And there we usually use Easy Repro, which is a subset for Selenium, which is especially made for Dataverse to run front-end tests in your pipeline or locally. And then I mentioned shared projects. Usually you have like code you want to share between your projects. Could be like in different different customer projects, or within a customer project in different Visual Studio projects. Those are usually like early bound or plugin base you might have, or you've shared code. For example, as mentioned, I'm living in Sweden, and there the person number is very important. So every individual in Sweden has a unique number identifying this person, and we use it for everything. So you use it for login to your websites, you use it for credit card, so everything is going through this person number. So every customer needs to save this person number of the customers. but Microsoft doesn't care because it's Swedish. So there we have some code in the shared code thing to check whether or not the number which was entered is a correct person number, and then checking against like governance services if it's not only the correct format, but it's also a valid number and stuff like that we want to share between all our customer projects. So we have a shared project for that. And why do we use a shared project? Because it's built into our DLL. So otherwise, we would have the need to use, for example, IL merge to merge different DLL files, which isn't supported. So you shouldn't do that. But you could use shared projects, and then the code of the shared project will be included in your DLL automatically by Visual Studio. And then, yeah, you have reusable code which you can share between customer projects and within your project. Okay, enough for PowerPoint. Let's go into the demo. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So let's see. I just move it over here. You can zoom in. Oh no. How do I zoom in? Is this better to read back there? Yeah, yeah, nice. So as I mentioned, so we have, that's the root folder. We have a bit of stuff here. I have to go a bit further here. Yeah, Git. So then we have Visual Studio configuration, Visual Studio code configuration. We have a development folder, which is obviously all our development stuff, the source code. Then we have pipeline definitions and the Power Platform folder, and Git ignore or Git modules, because we use not only shared projects, we also use Git submodules. So we have a repository which is our contains our utils for all the plugin base and so on. And then we use this in all the other repositories. So we include it as a submodule. So let's see, we start maybe with the Power Platform one. Yeah, so, and again, zooming in. So here we have, as mentioned, solution one, and this contains the solutions we have. And it not only contains the solution, so here it's an internal solution we have for our absence request and so on, but it also contains settings folder, yeah, and readme to explain it to my colleagues. But in the settings folder, you can, or we usually store the JSON files, which will be used in our pipeline to automatically set environment variables and connections to our connection references. Because since, I don't know, a few months, maybe 2 or 3, we have this option to, in a automated pipeline run of an import job, we can present a JSON file, and then we can configure like the values we want to have in this environment, the target environment, and we'll automatically like, okay, for this environment variable, we want to have this string because it's maybe an URL to some SharePoint or whatever. And we can also set like a connection to connection references automatically. So we don't have to do that manually after import. So those are stored in the settings folder. And then, as I mentioned, we have data. Yeah, don't use that so often, but in here you can have, for example, if you use the data migration utility from Microsoft to migrate some rows from one environment to another, you can store the generated schema in this one, which is an XML file, and then you can have the zip file which contains the data as well, either there or in an artifact from your pipeline, and then you can move like the rows automatically within your pipeline as well. Whenever you deploy, you also get the newest updates from the rows in the next environment. Let's see. Yeah, so that was basically the Power Platform folder. As mentioned, sometimes we have here a Canvas app folder. If you want to have like the Canvas apps unpacked somewhere, could be automated as well. Then we have pipeline definition folder. Yeah, so that contains our YAML files for our different pipelines. So we usually have one pipeline, which is a CI build, which will be triggered whenever we do a push or a commit. And it will run, it will build the solutions and run all our tests, front-end tests and back-end tests, and only allow to merge a pull request whenever this one is going through and there are no errors. And then we have an export pipeline and a release pipeline, and they are using templates and variables to make it possible to update those without destroying the variables we have. Like in the variables we have the solution name and connection names, which are different per project, but those files we could just, if we update those in our template, we can just write over to all the other projects to get the new shiny features. And we don't have to update the variables all the time because they're in a different file, which we don't overwrite. Yeah, and templates, it's templates is stuff like which will be reused in different pipelines, importing, exporting solutions, running commits or committing stuff, or running tests and so on, because we do it in different type pipelines. Yeah.
You say you run your build on every push.
Yeah.
On both?
Yeah, so it's basically on creating of a pull request, and whenever a pull request is updated after that.
Okay, so
not every push, but in every push within in a pull request. Yeah. Then. So, and then we have like the development folder, which is the most interesting one, I think. Like that. So we have one Visual Studio solution, which usually contains all our sub-solutions if they are not too many. But I'm usually working with small and mid-sized companies, so it's fairly small implementation. So we have like 25 projects, and that's okay having one solution. Sorry. Oh, it's hard. So like that. Yeah, so we have here again backend. This one contains everything which is on the server, like workflows or plugins mostly. And then we have a front end, which is everything with a client side, so PCFs and JavaScript snippets or so web resources basically, and the front end tests and so on. Yeah, package. Then we have a Sparkle folder because we use Sparkle to deploy our stuff, both from our local machines and as well in our pipelines. So in our export pipelines, we first usually build all the stuff, like we build our plugin projects and we run the plugin project tests or unit tests and integration tests. And then we also transpile our TypeScript to JavaScript and run the front-end tests. And if they are okay, we update all the versions of our plugins. And if that was successful, we deploy those to development environment to be sure that the newest and shiniest version is there and not some unfinished stuff. And then we take the export from development. So that's Sparkle we use for that. And this one will automatically also register all the steps and images if you have those, or those you have for your plugins. Completely automatically for you. And then, yeah, readmes and attributes and so on, so that's not so interesting. So let's take a look at backend then. So here we have, as mentioned, an applications folder, which can contain every surrounding application which isn't really part of Dataverse. So, as mentioned, some API to expose our Dataverse to others, or yeah, like an API we have. Sometimes we build custom portals for customers, and then we have like for them we have an API for the portal, and then we have front end, which is usually React to use the API. So those. Could be migrations, so SSIS projects to do migrations and so on. So everything which isn't deployed to Dataverse is stored in this applications folder, basically. And then we have a plugins folder, and yeah, there we can take a look at this. There we have one project for, as mentioned, or I'm doing that, a project per entity for plugins. And then we have also, which is the first one? Yeah, integration test project and a unit test project there as well. Per plugin project we have. And then we have, yeah, we go to this one first. And it's basically the same for workflows. Here we don't split any longer because it's so few workflow steps we need, custom workflow steps. So we just have them in one project. And there we have like one for the real steps and then test project as well. And then the shared is very interesting. So in the shared folder are obviously all our shared projects, and so there we have one which is our CDS utils, and that's the one we have in a different repo and import as a submodule. And then we have usually an early bound project, which is specific for this customer project. And there could be others if you have customer specific helper classes or whatever. You want to share between different plugins mostly. We could put it in here. And this one, usually if you have like an application in the application folder, they use the same shared projects for early bounding and so on, so that you only have to create those once. Yeah. And to create early bounds, I usually use the tool from Daryl Labar in the XM toolbox. Could be automated in the pipeline as well. I never had the need to do that, but you could do it. Yes, so let's see. Zooming in again. So then the front end folder. Again, a VS Code configuration, we will take a look at that, why we need it. Then we have a front end test folder for easy repro tests. And there it's really like if you run those, I don't think it's working in this example at the moment. We can test it, but it will pop up a browser and really click around in your Dataverse. So you really can do end-to-end tests for everything you deploy, like all the JavaScript which is checking stuff and preventing you from saving, you can test, but also it runs all the plugins in the backend because it really clicks around in your development or in your environment you're targeting. And you can run it in a pipeline as well. But I would not recommend to run those in like your normal export pipelines because they could run several hours depending on how many you have, but they are pretty slow. So those, if we have those, then we run them like once a night or something like that. And then we see whether something is broken. And then we have a PCF folder where we have like the code for custom PCFs we write. And it's a bit, so we have two repositories for that actually. So internally, whenever someone wants to use a PCF, he or she has to check with the developer because they have to go through the code. If it's an open source PCF, which is on the PCF gallery, for example, someone has to check the code, whether or not it's quality-wise okay to use it. And if PCF was checked, it will be copied, so the code will be copied into our internal repository because we only checked like this version as is and not all the future versions. So we are not allowed to use just whatever PCF there is. We have to check it. Those will not be stored here because they are like community stuff and they are in our other repository. Those are just like customer specific PCFs we specifically developed for this customer. And Yeah, and then there we have a TypeScript project or TypeScript folder. It contains our setup for TypeScript. Take a look at that a little bit later. And then we have a web resources folder, and that's the one which will be used from Sparkle. So basically, what we have here, yeah, in some cases, not very often, but in some cases, we have like CSS and HTML. If you have, for example, like some React application within Dataverse, but mostly we have only images and JavaScript here. So images for icons and so on, and JavaScript is client-side scripting, which will be deployed. So the TypeScript setup will transpile our TypeScript to JavaScript and store it in this folder, so that Sparkle can pick it up and deploy it to our environment. Yeah, and then we have the Sparkle configuration. Let me quickly open. Oh, sorry. This stuff. And here as well. So, where are we? Here. Development, I can zoom in here. Should have done that in the beginning. Front end Sparkle. Yeah, so that's our demo Sparkle, but basically for your web resources, you configure all the web resources you want to deploy, and then you just run one but, and it will automatically go through your environment, updates the web resource if it's there already, or deploys it if it is not yet, and then adds it to the correct solution, and publish everything, which could take a while depending on the list, but you don't have to do it manually. And the same configuration we have for our plugins. So let's see. Oh, wrong solution. Where are we? Not here. Okay. Let me just open the Visual Studio solution then. Yeah, so basically, if we take a look on this side, I can zoom in here probably as well. Can I? Oh, only in the middle. Okay, sorry about that. But here on the left side, we have our plugins and applications, as mentioned, and tests, and then those are referencing the shared projects as well. And those you can see here, like we have early bound and the submodules, which are different projects for themselves in our case. And as mentioned, those are our plugin base, which we reuse in every plugin for every customer in every project. And if they get the new shiny things, we can just update the submodule. For example, the new App Insight logging, which was released a few weeks or months ago. We have added it to our sub or repository and then pushed it out to all the customers, basically. Yeah, and so we have the Sparkle project here, which is not more than some bat files, which we can execute. Maybe better to see. Development Sparkle. Here we are. And so we have two folders, one for local files, which we can execute on our machine, or the ones we use in the pipeline, because they have to be a bit different in how they are written. But what you then have to do, basically, if you want to deploy, for example, the web resources, you just run the bat file. It will pop up a CMD. You select like which environment you want to have. Now it will mess up my development environment, but that's okay. And it will go to the configuration we have just seen and tries to update the environment, which won't work here, I think, because I don't have the right solution. So it tries to create a web resource and add it to the correct solution, which wasn't possible because the solution I configured I don't have in my environment because it was for a different customer. That's why it crashed, but it would go through the list and deploy everything for me. And the same for plugins. And in that case, it's not in the configuration file, but let's see. I thought that. Don't have it in here. Let's show it here. It's like a annotation on top of your plugin. So if you write those, you can like say, okay, what's the message and which entity and so on. And you can also define images and so on. And Sparkle will then go through by reflection and reads out those stuff from the DLL and registers your plugins and images accordingly, like you have configured here. So, which makes it really easy to update steps, because I was in a project where we had 250 plugins in one DLL, which was way too much. And there were a lot of plugins which no one was using any longer, and their code was commented out, but no one dared to delete those because then the deployment won't work and whatever. And basically with that one, and once one of my colleagues made a mistake and deleted all the assemblies from development. So she had to set up all these like 500 steps manually after that again, and remember and look in test and production. If you have that, it's not a problem at all. You just delete like DLLs, run the script again, and it will register all your steps like you have configured in your code, and you can see when was it changed and so on. So it makes life a lot easier. Yes, so let's see, what do we have? So that was Sparkle. I wanted to show the front-end stuff, for sure, yeah. So here we are. I have zoomed in already. Is it okay, Ivan? Can you read it? Yeah, perfect. So we have the front-end folder, which contains, as mentioned, the PCF and TS and so on. Most interesting maybe is the setup of the TypeScript stuff. And also why we need like those VS Code folders. So because in our TypeScript setup here, source code, for example, forms, do that. As always with when it comes to front end, you have like a source folder, and this one is split up into like the code, so the real code we are writing, and then we have some other stuff down here, which is like mocks for our tests, and also data scan. And that's basically, it's a script or a tool from Scott Duro to generate typings based on your environment. So it makes developing much easier, because if you, so it basically generates, so if I tell him, okay, I want to have my typings for account, contact, whatever entity, or sorry, table there is, so I want to use, it will go through and it basically creates early bounding for your TypeScript stuff. So, for example, I have to remember what I have here, but I think it's account. So it will generate, for example, account metadata, and then I have like logical name, collection name, type name, and so on. So I don't have to remember those. And it also creates account attributes. And then it's like all the fields on account. And they are typed, so I know whether it's a string or a number or whatever. So I can try to save the wrong typing, but it will say against it directly while I develop, and not on compile or on runtime then, which makes development a bit easier. And it also has a wrapper around the crappy web API that we have in JavaScript for Dataverse. And it makes it a bit more like the service context we have in C#. So it's more like those then, which also makes development a bit easier. So that's in the Dataverse gen folder over there. No, where is it? There. Yeah, mocks I talked about, and then we tend to split our code as well, like in utils and in code for our forms and code for ribbons, so that those JavaScript files get loaded on different occasions. Yeah, and then we have a folder for tests, like unit tests and integration tests for our different TypeScript functions. Oh yeah, and we could have, if we, for example, have some React application. For example, we have a product, which is like an integration to a Swedish provider to update addresses. Like if you move, again, we had a person number, they will notify everyone and say, okay, now this person has moved, and here's the new address. And we have like a product to integrate with Dataverse. And there we have a React application to present the login logging information to both their service and our product key, so that you have a valid license. And that's done via React app within Dataverse to make it easy for the end user. So those would be stored in this structure as well, because their TypeScript has to be compiled, so it would be in there. So that's here. And then we have a bunch of configuration, Webpack, ESLint, and Prettier to make our development easier, and that it's formatted and looks alike for every developer. So whenever I save, it will enforce our, like, how many tabs is it, and what's like, when do we have a line break and so on. It will enforce it so that it's for every developer the same, which makes it easier to come into another project. Yeah.
What framework are you using for the TypeScript testing?
XLMock. And there is the one for front-end testing from fake XMeasy as well. I haven't used that, but I heard it's really good. So might use that sometime when I have time for that. Yeah, and to be able to do those like automatic formatting on save, you need to have some configuration in the VS Code folder, but setting up this project is like a different session. And I have blog posts about everything in this TypeScript project, so you can take a look at that, and if you have questions, just come and contact me. Yes, so I think I showed you everything I have here. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
Are you able to share this kind of template folder with us?
Yeah, I got this question yesterday as well. I have to talk to my boss about it, but he's here as well, so maybe I might be. So if you follow me on Twitter or send me just a message, so we can. Yeah, I'm pretty certain it's possible.
And the solutions, do you unpack them or do you zip them?
No, yeah. So we unpack them. I can might be able to show you a pipeline, how it's working.
Do you include the plugins or are they covered elsewhere?
No, we include the plugins there. And as mentioned, so before we do an export, we deploy them to development. The latest version we have like in the main branch, to be sure to have only the stuff that is ready, because otherwise we know how it is. So we are developing stuff and it might take more than one day. So we have unfinished stuff in development, and then at the night our export is running and deploys unfinished stuff to test. We don't want to have that. So we like deploy everything over with only the stuff that is okay. And then we do an export. And then we do an export in unmanaged and managed. We unzip the unmanaged file, store it in the repository, and present both of them as artifacts to our release pipeline. Let me just go to our DevOps and select the correct project. Pipelines. Ooh, nice, it's not working. Yeah, but basically what it's doing, we can take a look at that and run maybe. Yeah, so that's basically an export, standard export pipeline we have. So it runs the C# tests, it runs the TypeScript tests, it changes the file version of our plugins to be the same as the solution which will be generated by the pipeline. So whenever the pipeline runs, it will increase like the last bit here. And it will deploy the TypeScript to development, and it will deploy the C# to development, so plugins and workflows, basically. And then it will do an export. And the export will then, let's see, in this case, we only have one solution. It's another product we are working on at the moment, and we only have one solution so far, but it would export like the solutions we need. Usually we have two solutions, like a base solution and maybe the flows. Yeah, and then tool installer, publish customization, and exporting. And then we export it once, throw it against the solution checker, and only when that's okay, we update the version, and then we export it twice again, like once unmanaged and one time managed. And then we commit, so do an unpack and commit it to the repository and publish the artifacts so that the release pipeline can pick them up and deploy it.
So in summary, you build the client-side and back-end code, deploy that to dev, you unpack, you export the solution, unpack it into source, but you take the exported solutions and deploy and push those as artifacts to deploy, rather than rebuilding the whole solution.
Yeah, we try to have like a build environment in between, so that we then can like export to our repository, I don't know, maybe even once in an hour or twice a day or whatever, quite often. And then have a build when we need it that takes those stuff and deploys it to a just-in-time build environment. But that hasn't worked so well, because that one has to be unmanaged, because otherwise you can't export the solution. And if you take away stuff from your development environment, it will not be deleted from the unmanaged build environment. So that doesn't work so smooth either. And you can't really have a just-in-time build environment, because it takes a long time to create those. And then we have always at least two languages. So we have to activate a language, which isn't possible out of the box with a pipeline. But there obviously are scripts, you can do that, but it takes hours to activate a language, as we know. And then if you have like third-party solutions, you would have to install them first. So yeah, it wasn't really practical. So we just export from dev both and then push it further. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much. Oh, I have to show you 2 slides more. Sorry. Yeah, to thank our sponsors once more. And then if you want to contact me, here are my contact information. Thank you.